Good day, scholars. We are going to proceed with Social Studies U.S. History Standard 20, which is the Cold War. Um, Again, SSUS History, Social Studies U.S. History Standard 20, Analyze U.S. international and domestic policies, including their influence on technology advancement and social changes during the Truman and Eisenhower administration. A, Substandard A, analyze the international policy and actions developed as a response to the Cold War, including containment, the Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, and the Korean War. All right, the roots of the Cold War. All right, you got the United States. We are a capitalist democracy with private property. People can have private property and respected individual freedoms and differences. And on the other side, you have the Soviet Union, or what we know now as Russia. Their communism. They support communism. That's what their government is based on. It was centered around at the time dictatorship, and you could not worship as they please, and they could not own private property or express their views freely. Both countries differed on how to rebuild and deal with Germany after World War II. These were the two nations at the time that were considered the world power. They emerged out of World War II as the dominant nations in the world. All right, the Cold War, 1945 to 1991. All right, the Cold War was the era of confrontation and competition beginning immediately after World War II between the United States and the Soviet Union. As you can see, that is Stalin, and he is reaching out toward Europe. As you can see, he's reaching out and he's grabbing on to Norway and Sweden and reaching toward Germany. All right. All right. The Truman Doctrine was proposed by President Harry Truman in 1947. The Truman Doctrine provided aid to any country battling communist aggression. It was immediately used to support the free governments in Turkey and Greece against communist threats. All right, next we have the containment policy. Containment was what the U.S. policy towards the Soviet Union and communism. It was used to block or contain communist expansion into other countries. So basically, they didn't want communism to spread to the surrounding countries of Russia and make its way toward the United States, because the more allies he built, the more that they felt that they may end up in the same situation as it was in World War II. All right, the Marshall Plan. After World War II, much of Europe was devastated physically and economically. To rebuild Europe and support democratic ideas, the U.S. developed the Marshall Plan, which provided billions of dollars in aid to European countries. The Soviet Union rejected the aid and developed its own economic program. Korean War. lasted from 1950 to 1953. At the end of World War II, Korea was split into two at the 38th parallel, with the soldiers occupying the north, with the Soviets occupying the north and the U.S. occupying the south. Both the north and the south formed their own governments and claimed the entire country as their own. In 1950, the Soviets-backed North Korean army invaded South Korea, nearly capturing the whole country. All right, here in this illustration, you can see the North and South Korea, and it illustrates the advances by North Korea and the UN's counter-offensives. It also outlines the unheld territory back in September 15th, 1950. You can look at that chart and see exactly the area in which they were fighting for. We also kind of call this particular war a proxy war, because it wasn't necessarily a war between the Soviet Union and the United States, but you know, they both had troops on both sides, so to speak. And the Soviet Union saw Korea as vital, as you can see, because they were pretty close to the Soviet Union. And should the United States occupy them in either that part of Korea, either parts of Korea, it would be a security risk for them, because that would put the U.S. in striking distance of them. All right? And we'll see this as we move on throughout the Cold War as well, this idea of proxy wars. All right, Korean War, long-term effects. There was no victory or clear winner. This wouldn't be the first time something like this would happen. North Korea remained communist allies with China. South Korea stayed non-communist and was an ally with the U.S. Truman had committed U.S. Troops with no declaration of war, set a precedent that other presidents would later follow. And this led to the increased military spending. In this time, of course, it was really pushed by fear. And as I've stated to you all before, fear leads its citizens to almost give up some type of liberty. But in this case, it helped them. It helped the president in a sense, because it helped It helped get the citizens to agree to stockpile arms, so to speak, or kind of prepare for war, so to speak, in their creating of an arsenal of weapons to go to war with, just in case they would go into a war with the Soviet Union. All right, substandard B, connect major domestic issues to their social effects, including the GI Bill, Truman's interrogation policies, McCarthyism, the National Interstate and Defense Highway Act, and also Brown versus Board of Education. GI Bill was when World War II ended. Americans were afraid that their wages will fall during peacetime. So the federal government enacted the GI Bill that granted veterans a variety of benefits, which included 1 year of unemployment payments, received financial aid to attend college, government loan to build homes, and to start business. All right. It also had a huge impact on American society. Home loans caused a huge surge in home construction. It created large growth in suburban areas and boosted education and allowed over 8 million veterans to go to college. Truman's integration policies. Unlike FDR, Truman refused to remain passive about segregation. He created a special committee on civil rights to investigate race relations, made several recommendations that Congress refused. Acting on his own, in 1948, he issued an executive order to desegregate the armed forces. He also ordered an end to discrimination in hiring government employees. All right, Senator Joseph McCarthy. The rise of communism in the Soviet Union and China and the war in Korea gave rise to a new Red Scare in the United States. When did the first Red Scare occur? Many Americans felt as though the U.S. was losing the Cold War battle and wanted a government explanation. In 1950, Senator McCarthy claimed to have a list of 205 men working for the U.S. government who were members of the Communist Party. This claim propelled him into the American spotlight. In 1952, McCarthy began holding hearings about communism, accusing many in the government of being spies or communist sympathizers. His witch hunt for communists, became known as McCarthyism. Those who openly challenged McCarthy would be accused of being a communist sympathizer. So, to be clear, it was almost a catch-22. He could accuse anybody he wanted to of being a communist, and it would really destroy their careers, whether they were in Hollywood or whether they were actors, whether they were businessmen. It really destroyed people's lives, this McCarthyism witch hunt that went down. All right, McCarthyism continued. McCarthy's downfall began in 1954 when in televised hearings he accused the U.S. Army of containing communists. As millions of Americans watched on TV, he openly badgered and harassed witnesses. With pressure from the American people, Congress censored McCarthy, ending his political power. National Interstate and Highway Act. This was passed in 1956 by Truman. Because of the boom of suburban growth, there was little public transportation from the suburbs to the cities for work. So he built over 41,000 miles of highways. So they built over 41,000 miles of highways were built to provide better transportation. So this is basically the interstate systems that we now know as 285, 20, 85, 75, so on and so forth. All right, Brown versus the Board of Education. At the time, President Dwight Eisenhower was president, and the Supreme Court overturned Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that separate schools for whites and blacks were unequal and thus unconstitutional. Some Southern communities refused to accept the Brown decision. In 1955, the Supreme Court handed down a second Brown ruling. It ordered schools to desegregate more quickly. The school desegregation issue reached a crisis in 1957 in Little Rock, Arkansas. The state's governor refused to let 9 black students attend Little Rock Central High School. President Eisenhower sent in federal troops to allow the students to enter. C. Examine the influence of Sputnik on U.S. technology innovations. All right, Sputnik. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first satellite into space. The following month, they launched another satellite, this time carrying a dog on board. The launches shocked Americans who had long believed that they were superior in the area of technology. Americans became afraid that the Soviets, would launch missiles at them from space. This created an urgency to initiate a space program to get American satellites in the air. This led to the creation of NASA and increased efforts to improve math and science. That concludes our review of Standard 20. All right, have a good day, scholars.